Hello and welcome to Viewpoint. The 700-page McGrail Inquiry report was published just before Christmas, sparking considerable debate and controversy within the community over its findings. The inquiry report found the Chief Minister improperly attempted to interfere in a criminal investigation and that he crossed the line. Ian McGrail was considered fortunate that no calls were made for his removal at the time of the HMIC report. The former police commissioner has said he feels vindicated. The Chief Minister says the government has been completely exonerated. Some have called for Mr Picardo's resignation, but Mr Picardo says he's not resigning, but he is taking legal advice on whether to challenge the report's criticisms of him. Gibraltar's news editors have read and analysed the report, and tonight they join me on the panel to discuss some of the findings, what they mean and where we go from here. Now, you can email us, but not on Viewpoint at gbc.gi tonight. We have an issue with the email, so send me your email to news@gbc.gi, news@gbc.gi. Very briefly, what you think. But please, do keep them brief. Earlier on this evening, I spoke to the Chief Minister about some of the report's strongest findings. And tonight, we will also be hearing from the Leader of the Opposition, Keith Azopardi, the Chair of the Police Authority, Peter Montegriffo KC, and the former RGP inquiry lawyer, Nick Cruz. But let's get started with my panel. I'm joined by Christine Vasquez, news editor at GBC, Brian Reyes, Gibraltar Chronicle editor, and Dominic Searle. Pleasure to have you here again with us, former Chronicle editor and former Gibraltar representative in the UK.
Evening.
Good evening. I'd like to start off, first of all, I think we should refresh ourselves on some of the key findings of the report. Do you want to kick off, Christine?
OK, so it was, as we know, a 700-page report, and after having read the report, we've seen that everybody has been able to find in a 700-page report, everybody can find something that either suits them or doesn't suit somebody else. What do we know? The governor may have had his reasons for wanting to get rid of Ian McGrail. So we know that Sir Peter Openshaw has said there were reasons, some of them were justified, some of them were not. Certainly not providing best available information to the governor on the death at sea. So the chairman says Ian McGrail did not properly discharge the duty he owed Mr Pyle. The HMIC report, so the chairman actually says Mr McGrail was fortunate no calls were made for his removal at that time. But he notes that none were. And in fact, at the time, everyone thought that the issues were quite easy to fix. So a lot of it on miscommunication. Nothing seems to have been communicated to Ian McGrail. I think that's at the bottom. And of course, the findings against the Chief Minister are very, very serious. And he is, as you said earlier, saying that he is going to dispute them. But the findings are serious findings.
Brian, would you like to refresh our memory on some of the findings?
I'll take a holistic view on it. So the first thing I'd say, it's 706 pages, not 700.
Well, I felt like rounding it up.
It's a complex report. It probes events spanning many years. There were some very clear findings. There were some findings that are very important but are more nuanced. So the starkest criticism, I think, I agree with Christine, is reserved for the Chief Minister. Sir Peter Openshaw, the chairman of the inquiry, described a number of attempts, grossly improper attempts is the language that he used, by the Chief Minister to interfere in a live criminal investigation that was ongoing at the time, and in which James Levy, KC, the senior partner at Assange, was a suspect at the time. He also found that the process leading to the retirement of the early retirement of Mr McGrail, a process that involved the GPA at one point, was procedurally flawed and unfair, mainly because they didn't spell out in detail what it was that they were alleging
Ian McGrail
had done to lose the confidence of the Chief Minister and the Governor. There was a finding as well that the GPA, the Gibraltar Police Authority, had been misled by the Chief Minister within that process. But then when you get to the nuanced findings, Sir Peter Openshaw makes clear that despite all of this, there was no actual interference in the police investigation, either before the critical moment, which was the search warrant. The police had applied for a search warrant for Mr. Levy. There was no actual interference before that. Or during the incident where the Chief Minister berated Mr. McGrail in a meeting in number 6. And the police investigation proceeded its normal course. And months later, there was not, basically, Sir Peter Openshaw described it as Mr. Levy was exonerated. He was never arrested, he was never charged, and everything was dropped against him, and basically he was exonerated by that police investigation that wasn't actually interfered with, despite those attempts. He found that there had been potential procedural flaws in the application for the search warrant against Mr. Levy, although he drew no conclusion on that himself. He said someone else looking at that could reach that conclusion, potentially. He found that the interim governor at the time, Nick Pyle, had not been manipulated by the Chief Minister, as had been alleged. And that it was entirely reasonable for him to have reached a conclusion that a change of leadership was needed at the RGP over issues such as the fatal collision at sea and the HMIC reports. He found that Ian McGrail retired because he felt that he was unfairly and unlawfully being effectively forced out. And he basically said that while the process was procedurally defective, those irregularities might have been cured, those are his words, had a proper process been followed. He didn't make any conclusions as to what would have happened. He didn't speculate. He declined to speculate as to what would have happened had the proper process been followed. But he also declined to recommend an apology for Mr. McGrail
because
or
of that,
which they had been seeking. So that's, in broad terms.
OK, let's see what Dominic wants to add to that. I mean, it was a very impressive report in that he had gone through every single issue that had been brought up forensically. Is there anything that Christine and Brian haven't brought up that you'd quite like to highlight or that jumped up at you?
I mean, what struck me most about the report was that in parts it was extremely thorough. But, the conclusions themselves were not so deep or complicated that they couldn't have been arrived at even by an industrial tribunal or so forth. They're not dramatic, but compared to some of the accusations that we're all debating, the actual findings are quite straightforward and actually probably quite simple to introduce. I think in the spectrum of that, it's a report that even the executive summary doesn't expect the average person to read it.
It's 80 pages.
Yeah, exactly. And I think normally you would get a sense from the person carrying out the inquiry, at least some overview to the public, which we haven't had. So he's almost exposed all our weaknesses and exposures.
Warts and all.
Exactly, and then left them there. And I think, I had a number of questions.
It's not his remit, really, to sort of...
Well, yes, but, I mean, in a sense, you can say he did what he had to do, because you get to the conclusions about the way in which the sacking, if you like, or the pressure on the man to leave was done. But there's a whole series of other things that clearly needed more thinking about. I mean, the whole business of, I think, the hidden microphones, and recordings and that sort of thing, which, you're talking about meetings with very senior people. It's a very questionable thing to do. I mean, there's other things that people can do. They can raise these things and take them up wherever they have to.
It wasn't a key issue that arose, though. It was one of the issues, but it wasn't really a key issue. I'm just
saying that there's lots of areas like that, which I think, once you put lots of things on the table, why aren't some things? For instance, the opening of the whole case. So there's two issues there which I think needed a lot more information. One was the whole issue of the death at sea, because if you go back to the IRA incident in '88, it was that kind of issue. People of doubtful background out at sea get killed, what goes on? I mean, here, so we needed to, I think we needed to know more how that interacted with that whole sense of why not trust? Why was somebody getting a lot of information, somebody else not? But
you felt there wasn't enough information in the report.
Well, and equally the opening of the instigation of the investigation into what was happening at Bland, in the sense there were a lot of questions that you could have had exposed there and asked there and said, well, why why was the Commissioner of Police, not the first meeting, but the second meeting, why was, I would have thought, maybe I'm being naive, but if somebody comes to you and says, look, I've got this serious issue and that, say, I'll send a detective.
Yeah.
I think it's important to say on the issue of the collision at sea that while Sir Peter Openshaw found that Mr McGrail did not provide the best available information to Mr Pyle, and that was a key element of Mr Pyle's loss of confidence in him, it was not withholding that information dishonestly.
Absolutely,
he didn't really make an explicit. He said he didn't know why that didn't happen. That had happened, basically. But he was explicit in saying that it wasn't a dishonest withholding of that information.
Yeah, I'd like to ask about the whole jurisdiction thing because there were a lot of actions that were dissected by the Sir Peter Openshaw, but looking at the whole thing as a whole, if you remember in the report, he made a comment about equating personal interests of a small circle of rich, powerful and influential individuals in Gibraltar, many of whom are professional colleagues and even friends, with the interests of Gibraltar itself may tend to encourage or to conceal misconduct or inappropriate and improper interference in official business or public affairs. Otherwise, any action taken to protect these individuals or their interests could then be justified as protecting the jurisdiction. This cannot be right because the end will always justify the means and those individuals and their interests will always be protected. Now, is it fair to say Gibraltar is very unique because we are so small? I mean, Sir Peter rejects that argument. But where are we? It seems to be a sort of a bit of a spectrum. I'm not quite sure where we are on that spectrum.
Well, there is a point where he says you have moved on. You know, I think it's in the recommendations with the note-taking.
Yeah.
You know, like this is a jurisdiction that needs to be bigger or needs to be more sophisticated. But you can tell that there are points in the report where Sir Peter Openshaw, you can see his language, where he almost seems to be getting more and more frustrated with Operation Delhi. It's like he starts and then he repeats himself. This is why I think the Chief Minister did it, you know, to protect his friend and mentor, James Livy. And there's a point where he gets to the meeting at Mr Picardo's house, where, you know, and he does drive the point home. And one of the things that I think Nick Cruz mentioned in his piece in the Chronicle was that the report is actually quite kind at times. And that's
right.
And that is why the criticisms levelled at the Chief Minister are, in contrast, even stronger.
Okay, and
I mean, he uses language in those criticisms that is very stark. It's very stern. It's tough. It's explicit, and he is a very experienced retired judge who wouldn't have used those words lightly.
One of the things that the Chief Minister says, you know, that what we've heard that we've spoken to the Chief Minister on the day. He says some of the criticisms against him are legally unfair, contradictory, and not based on evidence before the inquiry. So one of the things that he says is, well, I think he said, I did a striptease of my WhatsApps and of everything. If everybody had done the same, then could the outcome have been different?
Yeah.
And that is, I think, one of the things that Mr Picardo does put across in, it could have been different.
let me just go back to the jurisdictional issue and take it abroad as well, Dominic. There has been commentary in the UK about this. We've seen some of UK, not tabloids, but papers running reports on this. There's been a blog. Are people really paying attention to what happens here? And also, do you think Gibraltar has been sort of damaged by this sort of picture of us being quite parochial, maybe?
I could say not yet, because we don't really know what's going to come out. I mean, we've just gone through this Christmas burial period, if you like. It's difficult to know what Sunday papers want to do. The one thing that's always true, and it's particularly about, you know, big newspapers in the UK, I used to write for the Times for Youngs. I mean, there tends to be somebody who has an interest who follows it through. I mean, we know, for instance, that Adam Wagner, who's the lawyer for McGrail, has had a podcast. You know, so he's making noises. I gather that ministers and MPs are receiving letters. So, if you move things, at some point, people feel, I mean, we saw Emily Thornberry saying, I need to see that report. At some point, people can make a noise if they want to. In the great scale of things, I mean, when you see what goes on, I mean, I was in the Westminster bubble. This is like not so big there, unless there comes a moment when it becomes a cudgel to hit the Labour Party with, or there's a reason to feel that something should happen about it. It's not just a clean run. Is this on a scale of a story? Is it big or is it small? I mean, I think in many respects, what's going to be the big story is going to be the treaty. And if this is fed into that story, that could complicate things.
OK. Well, I did speak to the Chief Minister earlier on. He is the subject of what we're talking about tonight, in part. And I put some questions to him on the findings of the report, or at least I attempted to put some questions to him about the findings of the report. We had that interview here at GBC just a few hours ago. Chief Minister, thank you very much for coming in to speak to me and to answer my questions on the inquiry report. I'd like to focus on the detail of the report in a moment, but just a couple of broad questions first. The first being, after telling the public for several years that you had done nothing wrong, the report has found that you did. It did not vindicate you, as you implied in your ministerial statement. The report's findings were highly critical of your behaviour, which it described in the most serious terms. You crossed the line, your actions were grossly improper, inappropriate, sinister, cynical, misleading. Do you expect the public now to move on and forget about it, as you suggested in your New Year's Eve message last night?
Everything that I've said, Ros, in relation to the inquiry and in relation to everything else that I talk about in the politics that I do, has been true, completely true. I stand by exactly everything that I said to the inquiry when I gave my evidence, the reasons why I acted like I acted, reasons which I still maintain were the right reasons to act, for exactly in that context, right reasons for Gibraltar to act. What has happened since I gave my evidence is that we have received the report of Sir Peter Openshaw, who has taken his view in relation to my actions. His view does not change my view of why I acted and how properly I acted. But of course, I've said I'm reflecting on the things that he's said. He's made some recommendations. We're going to give effect to those recommendations. When somebody criticizes you, even if you don't entirely agree with them, you have an obligation to reflect on that in the context of a public inquiry in particular. But of course, I do expect the public to believe me. I expect them to believe me because I tell them the truth every single time. You might say that Sir Peter Openshaw has disagreed with me in some of those respects. He might have. That's his opinion. It doesn't change the facts.
Do you understand why the public is concerned about some of those findings, though?
Well, you say that the public is concerned about some of those findings. I suppose some of the members of the public that you speak to. I speak to a lot of the members of the public who are extraordinarily supportive of me, who believe that Mr. McGrail should have gone earlier. Indeed, some people who talk about Mr. McGrail being a bully who should never have become Commissioner of Police, who tell me that I acted entirely properly and that the report, in fact, says that I should have acted earlier. So the public, in that context, is a wide term. Some of the people you talk to, some of the people I talk to are different people with different opinions.
Let's look at some of the detail of what was found in the report. I'd like to take you through some of them. You disagree with Sir Peter Openshaw's conclusion that you attempted to thwart a live police investigation. So how would you...
That's not his conclusion.
He did say that you attempted to thwart a live police investigation.
Yes, indeed, but not that the investigation was thwarted.
No, I didn't say that.
Because he also reaches the conclusion that nothing interfered with the police investigation.
There are two things, an attempt
Ros,
and to do it.
You've known me for 20 years.
Yes.
More or less, yeah? Do you think I'd fail in an attempt to do something if I set my mind to it?
Mr. Picardo, you attempted to do it.
No, there is a finding by Sir Peter Openshaw, in other words, one man's opinion, looking at the evidence, is that he thinks that what I did could be interpreted as an attempt to interfere with an investigation. I maintain that is not what I did, and indeed I am advised that certain of those conclusions are challengeable because they're not based on the evidence before the tribunal. So my view is that I did not attempt to interfere with a criminal investigation, and the fact is that I find great solace in the finding by Sir Peter Openshaw that the investigation was not interfered with. If I had set out to interfere with an investigation, or indeed, if I had set out to do anything else in the context of the administration of Gibraltar, I am very likely to have been able to succeed in doing so.
How would you then characterise what was described in the report? So the secret meetings with the lawyer of the suspect, who was your friend.
Let me answer your question.
Well, can I finish it?
Let me answer. It's multi-layered. Let me answer the first layer. I would describe that as nonsensical. I'll tell you why. Something cannot be secret if the reason that you know it is the person who did it told you. Now, that meeting between me and Luis Baglietto and James Levy was only in the consciousness of the tribunal and in the public knowledge because I put it in my statement that it had happened and I explained what happened there. That cannot, in my view, and I respectfully say this to Sir Peter Openshaw, ever be described as something that is secret. Because if you tell me something that you did yesterday, that means that what you did yesterday was not secret.
Let's remove the word secret and let me return to the question, if I may.
But if you do that, you're going to be talking about something which is not the finding of the report. But go ahead.
The finding of the report was that you met with the suspect, the lawyer of the suspect, of your friend and mentor, in a criminal who was involved in a criminal investigation, and you came up with suggestions on how the police commissioner might be removed from office and how the then suspect, who was no longer a suspect afterwards, might get his devices back. You also were found to have made grossly improper disclosures of confidential information to the then suspect in the investigation. So, if that is not attempting to thwart an investigation, what is it?
Well, it's a conversation, which, by the way, didn't happen because there is no evidence of that. There is no evidence, and there cannot therefore be such a conclusion.
About the disclosures?
No. There is no evidence that I sat down in my home with James Levy and Luis Baglietto to discuss the removal of the Commissioner of Police. So therefore, it is impossible for an inquiry to reach that conclusion because there is no evidence of that.
There was a WhatsApp between yourself and the Attorney General pointing to...
But this is a meeting between myself, Luis Baglietto, and
Yes,
James
but there
Levy.
were WhatsApp messages with the Attorney General as well, which pointed to that conclusion.
No, there weren't. I'm afraid that you seem to have forgotten parts of the evidence. There were not those WhatsApp messages. But by the way, let me footnote this exchange. I gave all my WhatsApps. We saw none of the WhatsApps of the other side to this debate. They failed in the disclosure obligations. And then all that happened was that they were rapped on the knuckles for failing their disclosure obligations with the RGP and Mr. McGrail, whilst I did a complete striptease in relation to my WhatsApps and all the other information I had to give.
Yeah, there was one about Anoli Prosecchi to the Attorney General that you had mentioned. Asked him to look into Anoli Prosecchi.
Nothing to do with the removal of the Commissioner of Police. Anoli Prosecchi...
To discontinue the investigation.
Yes, but that has nothing to do with... You talked about whether that meeting involved the removal of the Commissioner of Police, and then you said that there were emails or WhatsApps to the Attorney General. You're mixing apples with pears completely there. So what happened was that I met Luis Baglietto, who's a very close friend of mine. I met James Levy, who's a very close friend of mine, in my home. I am not a part of the prosecution team. I am not a part of the police. As I told the inquiry, I was free to have those meetings, and there was no grossly improper disclosure of information. And I believe that that is an incorrect conclusion on the part of Sir Peter Openshaw, whose findings I respect, even when I respectfully disagree with them.
Didn't you say in the hearing that you had told all and sundry? I remember that quote.
Yes.
So,
but not that.
Is that not an improper disclosure of information?
No, it isn't. That's exactly why I was saying that in my view, and it remains my view, and I'm entitled to have this view and to respectfully disagree with Sir Peter, because I'm not part of the prosecution team, I am not part of the police, that's why we have separation of powers, I am able to talk to all and sundry about things that I may or may not have found out, because I'm not bound by any rules of confidentiality. Now, there was a lot of debate about that and a lot of discussion about the law of that during the course of the inquiry. And Sir Peter made a finding with which I respectfully disagree, in particular about my seeing James and Lewis.
You said that you've made mistakes.
Yeah.
Can you tell us exactly which mistakes you own in the in the inquiry report?
No, I can't, because that would be to go through the inquiry report, which is 706 pages, and give you, chapter and verse. And to come here and do that, I'd have to prepare for exactly that. And I'm still in the process of taking advice on which of the findings are completely challengeable and should potentially be challenged. So you'll allow me, as any other citizen, to be able to have the ability to do that and make a decision about whether I go to the Supreme Court on these matters or not, without sharing with you what are the things that I'm definitely going to look at or not.
I will be asking you about repercussions and the way forward afterwards. You mentioned the Supreme Court there. I want the reason, I will allow you that, obviously, but the reason why I ask is because there's a 700-page report with references to you having behaved grossly, inappropriately, cynically, etc. I've mentioned some of those words before. So you are saying a lot of it is not fair or it's not legally correct. I'm just trying to understand, what is what? Well, what do you own? What mistakes did you make and what are wrong?
And I'm just telling you that the time will come when I make a decision about whether I challenge those things which I think are not based on evidence, which are unfair and for which there's no legal foundation. And then I'll come to that determination. But look, those things that you're repeating, they've been repeated now for weeks since the report was published.
They are very strong words.
They are very
used against the Chief Minister.
They are very strong words, very unfairly and improperly used against the Chief Minister, in my view, for reasons that I may determine that I decide I have to challenge. But they are words, and this is you have to understand the structure of how our law works. You all heard the evidence. 38,000 people were able to tune into GBC and watch the evidence or read what was being said in the Chronicle in its reports the following day. One man has given us a report of what he thinks the evidence means. Another man might have given us a different view. Indeed, let me give you an example which will make this obvious. If Charles Gomez had written the opinion, it might have been even more damning of me.
I'm sure it would have been.
Well, perhaps. If Peter Caruana had written the opinion, perhaps it would be much less damning, even if they were not representing me.
But Sir Peter Openshaw
is impartial and is brought to look at the evidence. And when you go to a judge in the Supreme Court, the judge in the Supreme Court is impartial. And yet sometimes, on appeal, what he has determined impartially is found to be wrong, is found to not be based on evidence, or is found to be legally unfounded. And sometimes, when you go to the Court of Appeal, they get things wrong, and you go to the House of Lords, the Privy Council, the Supreme Court in the United Kingdom, and they get overturned too. We do not rest on a system where decisions about one person's reputation or one person's liability are ever made just by one man without the ability of appealing those. That's why I'm telling you, in relation to those things, where I'm advised that it's very likely that I could succeed in turning those around, and I will consider whether or not to take that to the next stage in coming weeks and months.
So could I, bearing in mind that you don't want to specify exactly what your mistakes you're owning and what you believe was wrong, let me just ask you, looking back at that period, it was a period that was very difficult for you, which you've already explained, but is there anything that, looking back, you would have done differently?
Perhaps there would be, yes. I should have asked the GPA and the governor to remove Ian McGrail because of the woefully inadequate management of the police that he was responsible for, and which HMIC pointed out. I should have perhaps acted more vehemently because of the despicable bullying that there was in the RGP, which was affecting the junior ranks of the RGP. Perhaps
well, I must say that Sir Peter Openshaw found no evidence of
by
that.
the way, well, no.
He said he was not. He did not find that.
He wasn't looking at it. He wasn't looking at those issues. But would you also like to spend some time looking at the things that were said about others in this inquiry, things that were said about Ian McGrail, the other principal participant in this inquiry, and the RGP? Because, of course, those also reflect on my actions. And you have to understand that I was dealing with an RGP which was mismanaged, as we now know, that the commissioner was lucky he had not been asked to leave earlier. Of course, we were dealing with COVID and all those other things at the time. And with an RGP, with a senior management team around Ian McGrail, and even after Ian McGrail left, was playing games about the disclosure that they had to make to the inquiry. That's what we were dealing with. That's not a healthy environment in which to operate.
You've repeated.
I'm very pleased that the Royal Gibraltar Police is now led entirely differently and that we can have full confidence in the current leadership of the Royal Gibraltar Police.
If I ever have Ian McGrail in front of me for an interview, for now he's quite satisfied for the report to do the talking for him, I will put certain questions to him, obviously. But you are the Chief Minister of Gibraltar. You are the highest office holder in.
And I can intend to continue to be.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm here answering your questions.
Yeah.
You can't say for one moment that I've hidden away in respect of this report. You can't say for one moment that I have edited the report to remove issues which might be politically embarrassing for me. All of the conspiracies that were being advanced ahead of the publication of the report, and that's in the context of all of the conspiracies that were being advanced before about corruption, about conspiracies, all of those things. None of those things were found, actually. Remember that the case that was put to Sir Peter Openshaw was that there was a conspiracy involving the Chief Minister, the Attorney General and the Governor to remove Ian McGrail, that this was corruption at the highest levels in Gibraltar, that there was no transparency and that the Inquiries Act had been changed in order to be able to hide things. All of those things have been swept away. And this case started because Mr. McGrail wanted an apology and damages. And he has got neither of those. In fact, he has been specifically told that he's not going to get
Okay, you're
this.
bringing a lot of things up. I do think we need to dissect some of those.
And so are you. And so you'll forgive me for also wanting to bring some things up which are important in the context of the confidence that people can have in how its government acted at the time. 6 years ago, by the way.
Let me just go through a couple of the points that you brought out.
Go ahead.
It is absolutely true, certainly with Michael Yemas, was found not to have conspired in any way to thwart an investigation.
But they threw all the mud at him. They threw for 5...
And he was exonerated.
For 5 years, they threw all the mud
But let me just say, Ian McGrail claimed that at the start of the process that he was forced to retire because of the pressure he was placed under. And the chairman of the inquiry found that was true.
No, he didn't.
He also claimed that the process was flawed.
He jumped before he was pushed.
He was forced out.
No, he said...
He was forced out.
He said...
Sir Peter Openshaw said that.
I'm sorry. The law provides for him to be forced out. There's nothing strange about that, Ros. There is a law that says that the commissioner can be forced out. And the governor of Gibraltar at the time was going to force him out because of the litany of issues that had gone on, which Sir Peter Openshaw found were sufficient for him to be properly pushed.
The process was flawed.
He found that he jumped before he was pushed. The GPA process was flawed.
Yes, the GPA process was flawed.
Hang on a minute. You didn't need Sir Peter Openshaw to tell you that, because James Nish Casey had told the GPA that their process was flawed, and therefore they withdrew.
Yes, they did withdraw, but however, there was still the threat of the Section 13.
No, not the threat of the Section 13. Because when the GPA withdraws, the law provides, it specifically says, in default of the GPA, it provides a power to the governor, for the governor, by the way, not the Chief Minister, not anyone else, the governor to act. And what was happening here was, for what Sir Peter Openshaw has found were good reasons, the governor was going to use his power under Section 13, and Ian McGrail jumped before he was pushed. And the push, what the inquiry tells you, would have been a proper push.
Let me ask you...
That's very important. Don't lose that in the context of understanding this. Ian McGrail was going to be pushed out of his job by the governor for good reasons. That's what the inquiry finds.
Well, one of the reasons that he was going to do that, he had lost confidence in Ian McGrail for past reasons, the death at sea and also the HMIC report. But also, you had told Mr. Pyle that Mr. McGrail had lied to you. So Peter Openshaw finds that he did not lie to you.
So Peter Openshaw finds that I genuinely and honestly believed that I had been lied to.
But you weren't lied to.
No, he says that I genuinely and honestly believed that I was lied to, and he then comes to the conclusion that he thinks that there was a misunderstanding between me and Ian McGrail.
Yes.
But that means that thereafter, what Sir Peter Openshaw has told you, I was properly operating on a genuine and honest belief that I had been lied to.
But the Attorney General corrected it and said that when he told you that the DPP had advised strongly against the search warrant, when the Attorney General corrected that information with you, then why was that information not passed on to the governor? Why was the governor to believe?
I don't agree that that is what the evidence shows. And in fact, neither is there any suggestion that the governor acted because I asked him to do so, because I'd lost confidence on the basis that I thought that he'd been lied to. The governor was acting for his own reasons, and his reasons related to the HMIC
so he didn't
report.
he didn't take on board the lie that you had told him about?
Well, you better ask him, hadn't you? Not me.
Well, it seemed to me as though he did.
Hang on. You're telling me that you'll ask Ian McGrail questions when Ian McGrail comes to answer questions. I'm here to answer questions on my behalf. I cannot answer about the state of mind of another person. So what I can tell you is that Sir Peter Openshaw found that the governor had 2 good reasons to remove the Commissioner of Police at the time. You only need 1 good reason to remove a Commissioner of Police. You don't need more than 1.
Okay,
Loss of confidence
he wouldn't
can
have
be
done
based
so,
on any basis.
But he would not have done so had you not approached him because you said that you had been lied to. So I'm just
No,
trying to
I'm
understand.
I'm afraid that's not the case. That's complete and utter conjecture on your part. Nick Pyle has not said...
He hadn't instigated anything.
No, hang on. Nick Pyle has not said, and you are conjecting entirely now, that he would not have acted if I had not spoken to him. What Nick Pyle said, I seem to recall, was that I spoke to him when he was likely to have wanted to speak to me anyway about the Ian McGrail issue. So you can see 2 of the highest office holders in Gibraltar already, for their own reasons, in my case, genuinely and honestly held belief that I had been lied to. And in Nick Pyle's case, the fact that has been found that he was misled and was not given the best available information in relation to something as serious as the death at sea in Spanish waters, at the same time starting to reach conclusions about the woeful leadership of the RGP by Ian McGrail, which the report finds, and given that you put so much store by the findings of the report, you should put sufficient store by this finding, was absolutely improper, and he was lucky that he was not asked to leave before.
That is absolutely one of the findings of the report. But so it's also...
Why aren't you asking me that? Why aren't you asking me?
Because I'm asking you...
Why I didn't act before to get rid of Ian McGrail when the Royal Gibraltar Police is such an important and integral part of the rule of law in Gibraltar,
nothing was raised about it beforehand.
Led.
The trigger was the search warrant.
Well, because beforehand we were dealing with confining the population of Gibraltar to its homes for the first time in our history. For the first time in our history. A government of Gibraltar has never confined the population of Gibraltar to its homes. This was traumatic for our people. Do you think instead of doing that, and by the way, let's look back at that period. Thousands of people died in thousands of countries in that first wave. Remember how many people died in Gibraltar in that first wave?
About 100.
0.
Oh.
0.
The January I was referring to.
0 died.
Yeah.
We did an excellent job in that period, but it was very stressful indeed.
I'm sure it was. I'm just repeating the findings of the report, which you clearly don't agree with.
You have to, with respect, you're repeating the findings of the report, and I'm trying to put them in context, so please permit me to do that.
That's fine. So you've explained your position. I want to ask you a question about the ministerial code. You have been found to have behaved inappropriately, and in the ministerial code it says inappropriate behaviour wherever it takes place is not consistent with the ministerial code and should not be tolerated. Chief Minister, do you consider that you've broken the ministerial code?
No, because I don't believe I've acted inappropriately, because those are the findings that I believe are not based on the evidence before the tribunal and which can be challenged.
OK. It's very clear that you're not going to own any of the criticisms against you.
That's not true.
What criticisms are you owning at the moment?
I have told you a few moments ago, so I'm sure you will remember, that I will consider which of the findings which are critical I will challenge and which I will not, and I have asked you to respect the fact that, like every other citizen, I'm entitled to take careful and detailed advice about that.
Let me ask you about the whole jurisdictional issue and what Sir Peter Openshaw said about equating the personal interests of a small circle of rich, powerful and influential individuals in Gibraltar. It's a long quote, but he's essentially saying you can't use the jurisdictional argument to protect certain people and their interests. What do you make of that warning?
I think that it's a warning that in the abstract is right, but when you look at the facts, it's, in my view, respectfully wrong, because even Ian McGrail took the view that some of the individuals involved were so prominent that their intervention could raise issues in respect of the public interest of Gibraltar, and that's why he came to tell me about it. And that's why he told others about it. So I don't think that that part of the finding, with the very greatest of respect to Sir Peter Openshaw, is actually reconcilable with the facts as they were before the inquiry.
You did say that you were going to instigate all the recommendations, and I think there were recommendations to guard against conflicts of interest. So are you able to tell us what sort of recommendations, what you have in mind in respect of that recommendation?
So there are, I think, 26 recommendations. You'll note, by the way, that 5 are addressed to the government and the rest are addressed principally to the Royal Gibraltar Police.
Yes, yeah.
The 5 that are addressed to the government involved 2 on note-keeping and record-keeping. Those 2 are already implemented. The Chief Secretary has started the process of implementing them. 1 relates to the Ministerial Code. That will be dealt with in the context probably of an amendment to the Parliament Act. 1 relates to a Conflict of Interest Act in relation to Canada. I don't think that that is actually implementable in Gibraltar. We've taken detailed advice. The Canadian Act would not actually work in Gibraltar, so we'll have to draft an act which is bespoke for Gibraltar. I've already given instructions that we should start to draft an act which is appropriate for Gibraltar. I told the general public in Gibraltar yesterday that I would see that those recommendations that relate to the government will be implemented in the first 100 days. And His Excellency the Governor and I have convened a meeting of the steering group in relation to the Royal Gibraltar Police, because we'd like to see those recommendations that relate to the Royal Gibraltar Police implemented before the summer.
We've not spoken to any of the other ministers, the government ministers. Have they all offered you their support?
Fulsome support. They feel very aggrieved by some of the findings, which, having read the report, they can also see are not substantiated by the evidence which was before the tribunal. And we all feel particularly aggrieved by the fact that certain people seem to be using this report only for political purposes when they've been funded by the taxpayers to represent individuals legally before the tribunal. That's not fair. Look, anybody can talk about the politics of this, and of course the Leader of the Opposition and everybody else, and everybody's entitled to an opinion. But some people have been paid by the taxpayer to represent individuals in the legal process. They're now exploiting that for political purposes. What does that tell you? That actually underlying all of this, there was always a political undercurrent and an attempt to use this process against the GSLP Liberal government and against me in particular.
I have to ask you one final question on the challenges. You mentioned the Supreme Court. So I suppose that's it. You're looking at potentially taking a legal challenge to the Supreme Court against Sir Peter Openshaw, against the report's findings. Can you expand on...
Not against Sir Peter Openshaw. I think Sir Peter Openshaw has done an excellent job of marshalling evidence, etc. But in some instances, I may disagree with that. There are ways to challenge inquiry findings. That's something on which I'm taking advice on. There are 2 principal routes in the law. One is judicial review. One is a constitutional motion. That's how you would do it. But look, there are other people calling for investigations, etc., etc. Well, look,
yes.
Well, if there were investigations, I would be very confident that I would be entirely exonerated of anything improper, because what you've looked at in the inquiry has not been looked at through the filter of a police investigation. We have been looked at through the filter of a police investigation in relation to whistleblowers, and we've been exonerated 3 times. I wonder whether those who are now calling for investigations would be so exonerated if some of their past behaviour were investigated in that
Is that
way.
what you're seeking at the moment? Because you did mention the pinhole camera in your statement, in one of your statements that you made.
I don't want to get into what it is that the government may feel it needs to do next until I've taken full advice on all of those issues. But there are a lot of issues that have arisen in the context of what has become evident in the past 5 or 6 years, and some of those things may require further action.
Right. OK, well, we'll leave it there unless there's anything else you'd like to add.
No. Can I simply say one thing, Rose?
Yes.
You've asked me a lot of questions
Yes.
tonight, some of them very tough. That's the role of the journalist in the work in which we do in a democracy. And, GBC, The Chronicle have been praised by Sir Peter Openshaw for the work that they've done. I want to add my own praise for the work that has been done by the national broadcaster and our newspaper of record. It's right that all of the participants in this process have to answer the questions that the report provides for. I seem to be the only one pitching up to answer.
Chief Minister, we can always count on you for an interview. So I thank you very much for coming in
Thank you,
and answering my questions. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. And that was the Chief Minister speaking to me a little earlier on today. Plenty to unpick there, but it's fair to say that he is not taking the criticisms against him lightly from Sir Peter Openshaw. Can I ask what your thoughts are?
I'm just going to pick up with how he finished, saying, thanking the broadcaster, that one of the things that he said in his ministerial statements is his political enemies. He asked his political enemies to place their fire on him and not on the jurisdiction or whatever. And one of the things that I really want to say about this report, having heard the interview, is that this is the report that we have. And this is the report that we are discussing. And as he says, he's totally in his right to challenge the findings. But we need to look at the findings, and the findings that are in front of us are the findings of this 706-page report, which has cost £8 million. And so
it's our job.
And that is what we have in front of us. And so when we look at that, it's just that I hear there's a bit of sort of moral equivalence. Just because somebody did this and then the other person did that, then this didn't happen. That there are things that can happen in tandem, and one doesn't exclude the other. So Nick Pyle had his reasons for getting rid of Ian McGrail. That is one thing. But the report, and this is the report that we're looking at, and the only report that we have in front of us, is very clear that Mr. Picardo's reasons were because he was not for Gibraltar. It actually says not for Gibraltar, but to protect his friend and mentor, James Livy. And that is what the report says. And sometimes I just think, we muddy the waters because it's so, as Brian was saying, the report is so dense. And the Chief Minister says that he's going to look at some of these findings. He might take legal action against the findings. But the reality is that at the moment, and things could change, and we will question, there'll be questions for another day or another discussion whether the Chief Minister does decide to legally challenge. From what he said, I think we'll be hearing a lot of other stuff happening. We've already seen that the history of the inquiry has had more plot twists than Game of Thrones. It's been like one plot twist after another, right to the end of its publication. And I think we're getting a lot more plot twists coming up. But at the moment, this is what we have. We've paid £8 million, and this is the report that we have.
And it's a public inquiry. This report belongs to the public, and it's for our consumption. Brian, what do you want to take anything out of the interview?
He's kind of reinforced what he said in his statement on the day the report was published, which was basically that he felt he'd been advised that some of the criticisms levelled at him were unfair and could be challenged. And he's clearly looking at that very carefully. He makes the point that the report is the opinion of one man. It's not a court of law, the public inquiry. So, it's his right to challenge those, I guess.
But we always knew that.
We always knew that. Yeah, but
that's the inquiry.
But he's making that point. Is what I'm saying in the interview. I still think that the language used by Sir Peter Openshaw is pretty tough. So I can see why he would think it was unfair and why he would want to challenge it if he didn't agree with those assessments, and why, when you're asking him to own it, he's not going to own it if he doesn't agree. But the language is still there, and that is what has jumped out of the report for certainly for us when we wrote those initial stories. Although all that nuance that he was getting into were also in those stories. But you can't get away from the fact that the man who we paid we didn't pay Sir Peter Openshaw £8 million, but the man who prepared the report that cost in its totality over £8 million, and the whole process reached those conclusions. Can't get away from it.
And there's a line, sorry, and you can carry on. Sir Peter Openshaw actually says in the report that Mr. Picardo still seeks to defend his actions, that he thinks it was within his rights, is not mitigation. Indeed, it makes it much worse. Sort of wonder what Sir Peter Openshaw would be thinking now, but...
OK, well, Dominic, I'd like to pick up on the apology issue, because he did say he'd made mistakes, but he wasn't prepared to say which ones. And you made a point about an apology not really being an apology if you're not accepting what it is.
If you say to people, if you think this, then I'm sorry, is not the same as saying I'm sorry because it's happened. But I think part of the problem, it goes back to what we were saying before, is Sir Peter Openshaw says a lot of things, but once or twice he actually says, and I think in the context of the recording and a couple of things, he sort of basically says, make of it what you will, sort of thing.
Yes.
And that's not, in my view, what his job was. It's not enough that he comes and says, this is bad. He needs to say in his recommendations. I think if I was paying that, if you were building a house and then there's bits of the roof missing, you say, well, it's not enough to say that it needs tiles. We paid for the whole building, and I think, in a sense, there's not enough conclusion in it. And I go back to what I said before. What you narrow down to is the obvious. He's put out there for massive debate very strong statements. I think really, in a sense, the problem is that, and I've said it publicly a number of times, I really don't think that we should have had a public inquiry like this, the cost and everything else. I think we should have had an industrial tribunal. Lots could have been said there. It would have cost a lot less. But when you've spent this kind of money, I think you expect something clearer. Now, you're not going to get, in my view, apologies from lawyers ever, anyway. And when you say that we're a very small jurisdiction, but I don't want to use the word barristocracy too often, but at the end of the day, when the top part of the society, we have to be careful what we say, because everyone now is threatening all sorts of legal actions. But the Chief Minister's, in my view, the apology he needs to make is a much simpler thing. It's not specifically about one thing. It's about the whole affair.
Just one thing about
why are we here?
One thing about the inquiry: it wasn't a court case. There's no guilty and there's no innocent. It was about findings.
No.
And Sir Peter Openshaw has presided over many serious, really big inquiries. He's very experienced at what he's doing.
That's why I go back to. I do think, and that's why I called it. I could use the word again, colonialoscopy. I think this business.
At least you can pronounce it.
We've done for a very long time. We keep bringing out the top QCs from UK for every other case. Either we have a justice that works in our country, and we are a country, or we're constantly going to the top league for certain things and not for others. Now, I'd say in Gibraltar, probably the two things that we are always in the top league is actually medical services, because you do get sent to the best places, and legal issues. But the people at the bottom can't afford that kind of justice. If this goes to appeal, at the end of the day, you're the Chief Minister, you've called an inquiry. Everyone sort of thinks, well, you're going to take what you get. Now, if what you get isn't really that clear and that good, that's a problem. But it's a problem that you should have anticipated before calling this inquiry. Okay. And I think
I just feel that this idea that you spend £8 million, you get the report, and then when you get the report, and as Brian said, the Chief Minister, because they are such serious allegations, is totally in his right to challenge them. Totally in his right. But what does the public think? What is the public supposed to think? You spend £8 million on a report. This is a report, and let's remember, it comes from the back of the principal auditor's report.
And should it be published, read it, and then just move on, or should we actually be, dissecting it and looking at, which is what we're doing? Because some people would rather that it just went away. Quite frankly, some people are not too happy.
It's not going to go away.
It's not going to go away.
There's a process. There's a process. For a start, there's a motion in Parliament. I think next week.
I think we're going to have to wait quite a while for the motion.
For that motion, right? There's a pending motion of no confidence from the opposition, the leader of the opposition. Who I think that's relating to the principal auditor's reports, but it may be widened. Who knows? And I think also that the opposition is really making a point, as it did with the principal auditor's report. It's not just the Chief Minister, it's also everybody sitting on his bench, on his side of the Parliament, basically saying, if you don't stand up and oppose this, then you have to own it as well. No?
Yeah.
So
we heard from the Chief Minister saying today that the ministers do support him fulsomely. Sorry, we're going to have to go for a quick break, but we will come back and we can pick up on this. After the break, we'll also be hearing from the Leader of the Opposition and also from the GPA Chair, Peter Montegriffo, who speaks about some of the criticisms in the report that that were levelled against the authority. And we'll also be hearing from Nick Cruz. He'll be joining us live on the panel in part 2. We'll be back in just a few moments. Welcome back to Viewpoint. We're talking about the McGrail Inquiry report. I'm joined by Dominic Searle, Christine Vasquez and Brian Reyes, and we've also going to be hearing from the Leader of the Opposition and the GPA Chair, Peter Montegriffo, shortly. We'll also be hearing from Nick Cruz. He was the inquiry lawyer for the RGP. He'll be joining us shortly in the programme. So we're talking about the actual report and what do we do now? There are some who say, look, it's been published, let's move on. There are some who want to challenge its findings, for example, Chief Minister. But like you say, I think everyone can agree on it's not going away, is it?
No, it's not going away. Brian was saying that, of course, it has to be debated in Parliament still. I think the Chief Minister told me last time they were going on to questions. There are a lot of questions because, of course, we've had the principal auditor sort of hogging the parliamentary
And Christine, can you
agenda.
explain the repercussion, both of you, the repercussion on journalists trying to put questions to the government and the inability to get answers because of the delay in the parliamentary questions?
Do you want to go, Brian? So,
the protocol.
It's frustrating.
It is frustrating.
so
yes.
basically, the idea is that if questions are placed in Parliament, journalists will not get answers to those questions because they have to be given in Parliament first. So the result of having the principal auditor over 4 months has been that not only have the opposition questions not been able to go to Parliament, but our questions haven't been answered
It's
either.
basically, they won't answer our questions if the opposition has already tabled a question on that issue.
Yeah.
So basically,
It's frustrating, but you can understand it. You know what I mean?
You can understand it. It's just that the net effect is that for over those 4 months, there have been no questions. So now they've all piled up. So we're going to have questions. Then I think we're going to have legislation next, which is the normal order of things, and then motions. So if people think that this is going to go away...
That's the normal order of things, but it wasn't the normal order of things with the principal auditor's motion, because that was taken before the questions.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So you know, we'll see, I suppose.
But
there
the
is a
Chief Minister has
process,
actually
basically.
said on the day that that's what's going to happen. So yes,
right, okay, I didn't know that.
it is going to be stretched out.
OK, so just to remind viewers, news@gbc.gi, if you have any views, what are your thoughts about the report and where do we go from here? Now,
Can I just say, in this issue of where do we go from here, I think one of the things that we haven't focused on much, really not just tonight, but in the general discourse, is the actual recommendations that the report makes. And whatever the questions about the Chief Minister in his post, should he go, should he stay, blah, 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 one thing that everybody is kind of agreed on, at least in terms of the government and the governor, who plays a key role, the GPA and so on, the RGP welcomed it as well, Police Commissioner Wayne Richards, is that they've all taken on board those recommendations and that they will be implemented.
Yeah.
And they're quite important recommendations.
An interesting and important point to make, actually, that despite the fact that the Chief Minister disagrees with quite a lot of what the chairman says about him, he still... has still undertaken to implement those recommendations within 100 days, I think he said.
The ones that relate to the government.
Yeah. OK.
And I think it was the summer, the ones that relate to the RGP. And yesterday, it was something he included in his New Year's message. He said 100 days, and that 2 had already been implemented.
Yes, I meant to ask him which 2, but
by the principal secretary.
Well, I mean, he said one on note taking
about
and
the
so
conflict
on. And I think it's about the
conflicts
of interest. There was a recommendation that
Yeah.
said whenever there's an official business or substantive official business, there should be a conscious statement restatement by the people involved saying, this is me, this is who I am, this is my role, this is a conflict of interest that I may
we
or
are
may not have.
voyeurs to what happened. I mean, they were in the thick of it, but we can now stand back and watch that happen. And you can't help but agree with Sir Peter Openshaw that if notes had been taken, so much of that misunderstanding would have been cleared up.
There's an interesting side to that, because in the UK, when Tony Blair came up with the sort of the FOI 20-year rule, note-taking completely changed in the civil service there. And so you can take notes, but people will be very careful about taking notes that in 20 years' time, whilst they're probably still 40 or 50, whatever it is, might be problematic. So it's not just about the formalities. I mean, I think, you see, in this whole thing, what the report does do is put a very stark mirror over our whole community, over the whole way in which we govern. And I think if I read the Openshaw message beyond the recommendations, it's you guys need to think about your ethos. You need to think where you are in this time, in this place. If you want to go to another stage with your community, and you really need to change the way you do things. Now, I'll give you an example. I found that some of the findings in the report were very linear. So he looked at one person, what did they do? And looked at another person, what did they do? But if those 3 or 4 people were in the room, hang on, we can talk to each other. You can stand up and say, Dominic, I don't think that's an appropriate question because it could be libelous, or we shouldn't have this meeting. Civil servants to do that, and they do it. I've been at meetings in London where civil servants are very clear to their minister about what they can do or not do. You really can have a system where the civil servant feels strong enough, it has to be courageous enough as well, at times, to look at the Chief Minister or whoever's there and say, Chief Minister, I'm afraid that's not appropriate now, whatever. That is the role. I mean, the civil servants are normally quite powerful people. They're not there to play games. They're there to follow and, in a sense, keep the rules going. Everyone else is moving around that. And I think, that what we've had here is the investment, and it's been building up after Hassan, I think. I mean, I made a point in a piece I wrote for the Chronicle that we used to call him a bulbul, but I mean, compared to what we saw subsequently, he was pretty sort of tame. And I think the culture that has been built up not just by the individuals, but by the rest of the community who vest everything in the Chief Minister. We have this thing that if you don't talk to the person at the top, you're not going to catch the bus. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
But I think the chairman, one of the meetings criticised was the one in Mr. Picardo's home, and that is one of the incidents where the chairman actually says, note-taking, if there had been note-taking, we would have known what was discussed in that meeting, because Mr. Picardo was saying, well, there's no evidence of what was discussed. They said the chairman was very clear. Look, I think you were in the middle of COVID. It was in the height of the whole Operation Delhi, so the chairman is very clear. This is what I feel you were discussing, and I know that the Chief Minister said it was not secret because I disclosed it. Well, of course, it was disclosed at a very late stage.
Yes, it wasn't initially disclosed.
No, with the chairman saying it wasn't disclosed because you would have known it was inappropriate. And one of the things that he does say is, look, you are all top lawyers. This is a question where you have top people, top policemen, top lawyers, Nobody took any notes.
But you also had the meeting that Michael Yamas, the Attorney General, had with Lloyd De Vincenzi
exactly, yes.
and various other people there. I think it was Ian McGrail was there, and I'm not sure who else was in that meeting, where to Michael Yamas, he genuinely believed, he had been very clear that no steps would be taken, but the others didn't take that away from them in that meeting, and if notes had been produced and circulated, that would have been clarified. So
I do have to say that in that meeting, one of the things that the chairman does make clear, that the RGP knew that it was free to carry on.
Yes,
with
the DPP very clearly clarified that it was an operational issue. But I think it was just an example of where, if notes had been taken in so many of these meetings that we heard, we may not have needed an inquiry.
The report may have been 400 pages.
Yeah, but who
if
takes
at
the
all.
notes? Then you need to have other people
The civil
present.
servants,
And this
yeah.
is why, very often in government situations, you have people meet in private, ministers meet, and then
But
there's
you
a
see, this
formal
is why,
meeting and minutes are
Dominic, this is
taken.
why I disagree with you when you say there shouldn't have been an inquiry, because I think sometimes when you have these inquiries and these things come out and we implement these recommendations, it makes us better and it makes us stronger. So I think as long as we do
The reason I don't agree with you is because, unlike many years ago, we have a massively well-educated population. We have an affluent population. And if people don't know right and wrong and simple things, and note-taking and things like that are very simple things, then we have a problem. We need an £8 million...
Clearly we do.
If we need an £8 million inquiry to tell us that, what else do we need an inquiry to do? We have to do it ourselves. When that border opens completely, if we aren't running ourselves properly, what are we going to be? A vassal state of other places?
It's what Sir Peter Openshaw says. I can't remember the exact quote, but Gibraltar could be such a great place, and it
Exactly.
needs to rise to the challenge. We're going to go to the leader of the opposition now. Let's hear what. Obviously, this is going to be more of a political angle now from what we're talking about here, which is the recommendations of the report. I spoke to Keith Azopardi a little earlier on today.
Well, it was like watching Cloud Cuckoo Land, because someone who does a New Year's message in the context of the most serious public inquiry report that makes findings that he made grossly improper attempts to interfere in a criminal investigation, and hardly speaks about it and says that he wants life to move on. Well, it's not as easy as that, is it? I mean, life cannot simply move on. We have already called for his resignation on the back of the inquiry report. We think an election should be held and that the people of Gibraltar should decide what their verdict is on the whole situation.
The Chief Minister has said he is not going to resign.
Well, he has said that, and I think that, and we've said it also, that all ministers now need to reflect on the position themselves. They've seen the report, the 700-page report. They can come to their own conclusions as to the report and what it means. And do they really want to support a chief minister that has been found not just once, but on several occasions to have acted improperly, to have acted in a manner where he has attempted to interfere in a criminal investigation? This is not a simple situation where people can just whistle and move on. They've got to either do one thing or another. They either back Mr. Picardo or they sack Mr. Picardo. But if they back him, then they have owned and condoned the same actions, and then the people of Gibraltar will know that the ministers not just have condoned it, but they own the same improper action, they've backed it to the hilt, and they will be labelled like that for the future.
Mr. Azopardi, Nick Cruz came out with an op-ed in the Chronicle this week, and he has talked about how inquiries usually lead to civil, criminal and legal investigations. Let me ask you, now that the report has been published, what do you think should happen next?
Well, what I think should happen next is that the Chief Minister should resign and an election should be called, because the findings are very clear. No Chief Minister in history has ever seen such findings of conduct that implicate a chief minister in this way. So the chief minister should resign and an election should be called. That is precisely what I think should happen.
Do you not agree with Mr. Cruz that there should be investigations into some of the issues that arose in the report?
Well, look, that's the matter for the police. The police have seen the report like I have seen it. They don't need me to give an opinion as to whether or not they should do their job. They've got a job and a responsibility to do. It's a matter for the police when they look at that report and those findings of Sir Peter Openshaw, that on several occasions Mr. Picardo made grossly improper attempts to interfere in a criminal investigation. I cannot put it better than that. He heard all the evidence. He heard all the witnesses. He came to those findings, not just once, but on several occasions. Those who have responsibility in different areas need to decide what that means.
Mr. Azopardi, you've been very active on social media since the inquiry report was published. So let me put it to you that the inquiry has been more effective at holding the government to account than the GSD has been in 14 years.
Well, that's not true. I mean, look, the GSD holds the government to account on a number of things.
How effectively, though?
Because we don't get information is part of the situation. You know, that we've complained about this for a long time. The inquiry has had the benefit of disclosure, the benefit of investigating and cross-examining witnesses that we never get. You know, they've had the WhatsApps of Mr. Picardo. And so they've had an insight into things that have been happening in Gibraltar. We have alluded to those things happening. We've had the principal auditor's reports. We've had the inquiry report. We've had several principal auditors' reports. These are now not isolated cases. The situation is such that it is now clear that the facts are mounting up. So the question that people legitimately can ask themselves is that when the principal auditor complains about things, when the inquiry report reaches certain conclusions, how can they now be isolated? Because I think the opposite is true, that what this is proving is a methodology, a conduct, an approach to governance in Gibraltar that is marking the history of this government. That is their true legacy, and that's why change is so necessary in Gibraltar.
You've spoken about you say that the Chief Minister should resign, but we are about to ratify a treaty which will deliver the biggest economic and political change we've possibly ever seen. So is this really the right time to call for the Chief Minister to resign and to have a general election, which of course would be very opportunistic for the GSD as well?
Well, the government has said that the negotiations for the treaty have concluded. So the treaty is done and dusted. What now needs to happen is a parliamentary debate and ratification, which is an effectively administrative process in the UK, because it involves the laying of the treaty in Parliament in the UK. It is absolutely the right time, because look, we didn't pick and choose the timing of the publication of the reports. We didn't pick and choose the negotiations. Mr. Picardo went to the 23 election saying he was 0.01% away from a deal. We know that that was untrue, because it's taken him over 2 years to get to that 0.01%. So that cannot have been true. We didn't pick and choose the timing of the inquiry report. The inquiry report is shocking and scandalous as to the conduct of the incumbent Chief Minister, and there is an inevitable conclusion to that politically. Politically, the inevitable conclusion is that the people of Gibraltar should now decide the future of this government if the ministers are prepared to back a Chief Minister that has grossly attempted to interfere in a criminal investigation.
Well, no one has certainly come out and spoken against the Chief Minister, and his party has thrown its support behind him. You've called for his resignation. He has said he is not resigning. So you yourself actually had calls for your resignation at the end of the last election, and you stayed on. So
well, it's a very different matter, Ros, with all due respect. People can take a political view as to whether I'm doing my job well or badly, a political view, and there can be a leadership challenge, as there was in my case. I went to a leadership election and I was re-elected, but I have not been found to have grossly interfered in a criminal investigation. This is a very, very different situation. So let's not make it about the same thing, because it isn't.
But to finish the question, it's not going to happen. He has said it's not going to. So what now?
Well, what we have now, let's be clear, we've called on ministers to take the responsible way out, which is to make sure that they don't go down with the ship. But if the silence is deafening from ministers and no one is prepared to act here, well, we've got a parliamentary motion of no confidence in the Chief Minister. That still has to be debated. And what we are going to fight for in Parliament is for our motion of confidence to be carried. Again, we will ask the ministers to reflect on this.
You would have to rely on a minister turning against the Chief Minister.
Yes, of course, because that is the parliamentary system that we have. But the parliamentary mechanism that is next on the agenda is that our motion of confidence should be heard and debated, and we hope to carry it. And if we carry it, then the Chief Minister must go.
Do you, well, to just press that point again, do you have any hopes that you will turn any of the ministers?
Well, I hope that, you know, there are responsible people on the other side. And I hope that when they look at this, they can see very clearly that there are some people criticized in this report. You know, Mr. Picardo is not the only one criticized, but Mr. Picardo is the only one who has these serious findings against him. And that they will
serious
look
findings
at this.
he disagrees with. He has made it very clear on his interview that he does not agree with a lot of what Sir Peter Openshaw has said in respect of his behaviour.
Well, look, of course you can say that, but the fact is that it's there. The people of Gibraltar have spent £8 million on reaching a conclusion that, in Mr. Picardo's own words, was going to establish the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Well, the truth is that he has been found guilty on several occasions. The findings are that he has grossly attempted to interfere in a criminal investigation on a number of occasions by a serious, experienced criminal judge. I hope in those circumstances, the Minister for Justice, who has to swear a special oath of office to respect the rule of law, understands that the rule of law requires that a Chief Minister of the day should not have been found to have attempted to interfere in a criminal investigation. That the leadership contenders, the prospective leadership contenders, look at the situation and understand that surely this is not the moment to back a wounded Chief Minister that has been found, adjudged to have had conduct of that nature. But if it doesn't happen, well, then the people of Gibraltar will know that the ministers have backed him, owned and condoned that action.
And that is Keith Azopardi, the GSD leader, talking about his thoughts on the inquiry report. At the beginning, he talked about his reaction to the Chief Minister's New Year's statement last night. And at the end there, he's talking about the ministers. If they back him, then they own it as well. We are going to be talking about comments you might have on Mr. Azopardi, but we are joined by another person now, Nick Cruz. Thank you very much for joining us. I keep saying that you are the former inquiry lawyer for the RGP, but you do not represent them any longer. You want to make that point very clear.
Well, yes, look, I suppose I'm here because I expressed an opinion in the newspaper, in Brian's newspaper. But I just want to make it clear, look, this is, you know, my role with the RGP finished with the publication of the report. The inquiry's finished. I have never commented on the inquiry during the period that I have been their lawyer. That is now finished. I'm no longer their lawyer. So, you know, I am commenting on a public report in a purely personal capacity. And I just want to make that clear. I don't want people to get confused, and it wouldn't be fair to the RGP. I have no idea whether the RGP agree or disagree with my views at all.
I am reliably informed that I will be speaking to the Police Commissioner for Viewpoint next week. But Mr. Cruz, I do want to put to you a comment that the Chief Minister made. He didn't actually name names, but I'm assuming he was pointing in your direction. Somebody who was paid handsomely by the public purse to represent the RGP in this inquiry, who is now using it as a political platform to launch an attack politically on the GSLP government that he leads.
Well, OK. Look, Mr. Picardo, as always, plays the man, not the ball. You know, he did it with poor Mr. Sacramento. I've never met him, but I think he's got no political profile. I don't know if anybody's met him, to be honest. He's one of these bean counters who's done a good job, and he's sort of exposed what really is tantamount to government nepotism, corruption, and the rest. And he gets attacked and has a 7-week process of attack because he just doesn't like, the Chief Minister doesn't like what he says. And ultimately, the best example of an attack is Mr. McGrail. I mean, ultimately, what does Mr. McGrail do? He presides over a police force who happens to have 2 police officers who investigate a serious allegation of a very serious allegation to do with the national security system. Doesn't do anything else. I mean, he's not even the investigating officers. And the next thing he knows is he gets sacked. And that's clear. So Mr. Picardo's tendency to play the man is just really underpins your question. I have done a job. I have been paid. By the way, I think in value for money, if you look at the statistics, certainly a lot less than his lawyers and others. But you'll judge whether that was value for money. But I think the police have been entirely cleared. But look, I'm not here to speak for them. I did a job. I finished a job. I've been paid. I have
They
made
were
a
criticised about
I've expressed-
disclosures now that you mention that.
Absolutely, but they weren't, and they owned them, right? Something which is not that common, it appears nowadays. But they owned them. But I finished the job. I've done the job. This is purely a view that I have as a citizen, someone who I suppose is a political commentator. I write letters, sometimes congratulating Mr. Picardo. Only last June I wrote a letter congratulating him on his work on the treaty. I've done that very often. I think he's done some very good work over his period. But, you know, he is now living in La La Land. And I think it's evident from the way he's approached the outcome of this inquiry that he is delusional, I think. He just simply doesn't want to face the truth.
I have to ask you the most obvious question. You have called for a general election. You say that the government has lost its democratic legitimacy. Are you planning on standing at the next election?
No, not necessarily. I mean, let me make it clear. I take the absolute view that there's time for political change, and completely. And I've made it very clear in the opinion piece I did. I thought, you know, if you take the various things that have happened, Principal Auditor Report number 1, Principal Auditor Report number 2, if you take what in essence we all understand was at the best knowing exaggeration, really most probably a lie at the last election, that we were 99.9% of the way onto a treaty. We're here in 2026, we're still to see it. There's been a political announcement. If you take all of that, the other matters, the anti-corruption authority, which doesn't seem to actually materialise, and perhaps we know why, if you take it all together, what I say is that this government has lost the trust of the people. It's lost its democratic legitimacy. And when Mr. Picardo says, I'm going to, you know, people will know when the inquiry makes its decision, and he was supportive of the decision, it'll be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. How many times have we heard that? Except when it's the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, he no longer wants to own it. Because actually, what it's found is extraordinary behaviour by a chief minister. Something which really, you know, we kind of should move on from this as a population. It's just not acceptable to have someone behaving like that and continuing to represent Gibraltar in that office. The thing to have done, my view, and that's the point I make in that opinion, is to own your mistakes. It'd been all right to have said, look, I've been found to have done wrong. I apologise profusely to Mr. McGrail, to the RGP, and to the taxpayer who's paid a lot of money, and taken steps that most people would do, which is to resign.
He doesn't believe he has done anything wrong.
Well, I know, but you know, it's like someone being told that the world is flat and he insists, or the world is round and he insists it's flat.
Feel free to jump in, everyone, because you're all editors. You've got Nick Cruz here in front of you, so...
I'm just thinking, Mr. Picardo does have the right to also challenge. I mean, that was the example that he said, that if a judge says something, you have the right to take it to the appeal, to the Court of Appeal, and then to the Privy Council. You know, you do have recourse.
Yes, but look, if you listen to him carefully, occasionally you see some truth leaking out. And this is one of those examples. A public inquiry it's an inquiry of truth. Okay, so the whole purpose of that £8 million, the 3 years and the process, is that somebody who's held in high esteem, he seems to hold him in high esteem, digs deep and comes up with what he believes is the truth based on evidence. And that is what Sir Peter Openshaw has done. Now, it isn't a process in any inquiry that you have an appeal process. There isn't like appeal inquiry 1, inquiry 2 and inquiry 3. What you do have is something called judicial review. Judicial review, first you have to ask the court for permission, and what you're basically saying is that somebody, a judge normally, or it could be a government body, has come to such an absurd decision, such a crazy decision given what he's heard, that it's simply not sustainable. That's the gist of judicial review. There are other bases upon which you can challenge. So it isn't an inquiry with an appeal to the Court of Appeal, Supreme Court of Appeal, in the normal sense. It would be a judicial review. Now, of course, Mr. Picardo, using our money, can go and spend a lot of money and challenge the decision of Sir Peter Openshaw. But most people, in fact, including him, seems to think that it's a very considered report. He's been empathetic to, I think, quite an extreme, even with Mr. Picardo. But with everybody, he has given them the benefit of doubt wherever possible. I think most people in Gibraltar who read the report, and it's a big report, will understand that this is a very carefully conservative report. And therefore, of course, Mr. Picardo has a right to judicial review it. Good luck with that.
What do you make of the findings of the report that Mr. Picardo keeps on highlighting? Things like, for example, that Sir Peter Openshaw found he didn't make the finding himself, but he said that there was enough evidence there for someone tasked with that to find that there had been potential procedural flaws with the way that the RGP applied for the warrant, that there was no actual interference either before or after the search warrant incident. James Levy was exonerated at the end of the police investigation that proceeded without any interference before or after the search warrant. Those are findings in the report as well.
No corrupt plot, no manipulation, and the decision to get rid of...
It's not to detract from the language that Sir Peter Openshaw uses to describe what he believes the Chief Minister did. It's not to detract from that extremely serious language, extremely serious findings, but there are other findings as well. Yes. But that we're not referring to.
The decision to get rid of Mr. McGrail was entirely Nick Piles.
Yes. Look,
so I mean, what just those.
I mean, you give me about 3 or 4 things. I mean, what I would say is, look, if someone like James Levy KC is exonerated, he is exonerated. He's a man of impeccable character, and that's the end of that. You know, if there are other findings, they stand on their own. Look, my article was about democratic legitimacy. It was about trust. It was about the Principal Auditor's Report 1 and 2. It was about this incident. It was a focus entirely, it was a political article, and it was a focus entirely on Mr. Picardo's suitability to continue in the post and ministers who support him. It was not a commentary on the inquest at sea. It wasn't a commentary on any of these other things. And so there is nothing that I can add to that. In relation to the warrant, the lawful warrant that was issued, any commentary by Mr. Peter Openshaw, he says, look, it's not the right forum to challenge that. You have judicial review for that, and that could have been done at this time.
But he makes very specific recommendations as to what he thinks the RGP should do when they next apply for a warrant of this nature.
But let me make this point very clearly. The RGP, and I can give that information, but it's public, it's not as a RGP lawyer, is the core participant that made the most recommendations, because it's a learning organisation. It made about 35 recommendations. Mr. Openshaw, Sir Peter Openshaw, has looked at them and adopted quite a lot of them. Some he hasn't, because he said it's outside the remit. He's adopted a lot of them. And if you comparatively look at them, you will see a lot of them. So to the extent that somebody, Mr. Picardo, would like to divert attention and go, oh, look at all these recommendations against the RGP, well, they're self-induced recommendations about what is needed. So what I would say to you is recommendations have been made, and they should be followed. In my personal opinion, as to the RGP, I think they issued a press release saying that they were going to adopt them. They did. And of course, but the primary focus of the recommendations, 1, 2, whatever, is all about conflict of interest, isn't it? What Sir Peter Openshaw has really said to this community is, let's grow up a bit. It's time not to be
Nick,
to carry on in the same way. I think Dominic, in what I saw earlier, was making the point is that there is a degree of moving on, and I think that is something that we should learn. If we don't take from this 8 million, I know Dominic doesn't think it should have been spent, Ross appears to, if we don't take from this 8 million lessons, then frankly, other than, well, you know, helping people like me as a lawyer, it's not really been a very useful exercise.
We shouldn't have spent it is that we didn't need to spend it. We should have known where we were. People like you are intelligent enough.
Of course.
And we've had enough debates. We've had enough issues of
I
police.
agree totally.
I mean, it's not the first time. We're talking about history of police force. I mean, I sat through Mario Paez's case. I mean, the police force has always had, has been dogged by difficulties, just as it's had very difficult challenges to deal with, and it has a very,
You're absolutely right. We should have learned.
We should have reached
that point, but it's
evident.
It's absolutely evident that the Chief Minister hasn't learned, and in the face of this report today seems to have learned absolutely
nothing.
nothing.
Nick, I must ask you this question. I'm sorry, I want to go back to your statement.
Frankly.
I want to go back to your statement because you're talking about legal consequences that might arise from an inquiry report, and you talk about potential civil proceedings, criminal proceedings, or legal ones. What specifically have you got in mind?
Well, let me just put this in context. Ross, I wrote an article in the Chronicle about democracy and democratic legitimacy. There was one paragraph that dealt with that issue out of 1, 2, 3, 4 page. With all due respect to GBC, you somewhat sensationalise that part.
Well,
the
it's very
observation-
clear that the implication is that
no,
there
the
should be.
implication, absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot of people
The
say we're doing
implication,
this
absolutely. But what I'm trying to say is that the headline, which I've got here, was Nick Cruz calls for this. No, what I said, and I could read it out to you, is what legal consequences arise for the report and who they may bite on, if any, are for the law enforcement or regulatory bodies to engage with. Exactly. And I gave examples of the UK. Why? Because in the UK...
Gibraltar can be no different.
Yes, of course. Of course we can't. If we adhere to the rule of law, or if we want to be this banana republic that we seem to want to embrace, then we don't.
What are you saying then?
What I'm saying to you is, like in any UK public inquiry, at the end of the inquiry, people look at the outcome, look at the findings, and to the extent that there's anything that would bite on anyone because they have done something wrong, the appropriate body, be it law enforcement, regulatory or otherwise, will look at it and go, is there something we should do? And is there something we should investigate? That does not translate to a prosecution, to a civil process.
No, hold
it's
on.
Purely...
GBC did not say that there should be a prosecution or a civil process. We're saying that what you're saying is that this is something that should be investigated, whether it should be looked at as to whether it applies here. That's what the GBC story said.
Yes, well, but...
We did not say that you called for prosecutions or criminal proceedings.
Yes, but well, look, I mean, like I say, you know, I don't roam back from the anything in my article, but I certainly did not present it in the manner that you suggest, which is that Nick Cruz calls for this. No, what I was saying is that in most, well, not most, I think in all inquiries in the UK...
Sorry, Nick, and having read the report, who do you think the fire would be directed at?
Well, that's a different position. Now, insofar as you say... the point I'm trying to make is, in UK inquiries, when they come to an outcome, whether it be, you know, Hillsborough, whether it be the Bloody Sunday inquiries, they are often investigations, they are civil processes, people have rights they can follow. The authorities, naturally, who have access to the reports and can read it like anybody else, can take a view. And if they believe that in the context of that inquiry someone has done something wrong that borders on the criminal or the civil, that authority can rightfully investigate. And indeed, in Gibraltar, no different to the UK, under the Police Act, one of the obligations of the police is to detect crime or investigate crime. If it's alert to something that could be criminal, it must investigate. It's not even a choice. The point is, all I was saying was there's a process, like in the UK, we shouldn't be any different.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that necessarily anything will happen.
No, we didn't say that it would in the GBC story,
with
all respect.
I wonder that if you do stop and think that something might happen, what you have in your head, because I think, I was saying earlier that I think this isn't going to go away. I think it's going to now there's going to be dirt on all directions.
Yes.
I think there will start.
Yeah. So look, I am absolutely not now, because I didn't say it in my article, I'm absolutely not going to go and give you Nick Cruz's personal view of what should happen next in a criminal process. I was making the observation that it is normal in an inquiry in the UK, and it should be no different here, that a public document gets considered by those who have responsibility, regulatory, law enforcement, and if there's any other thing that comes or arises, it should be pursued because that's what the rule of law demands.
I'm pretty certain that is what our GBC story said, Nick Cruz. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, though, because we do have Peter Montegriffo that we are going to bring on our screens now. The GPA did get criticised, and this is what Peter Montegriffo said to me about the recommendations in the report.
Mr. Montegriffo, thank you for your time today. My first question to you is, do you accept the report's findings, including that the Chief Minister deliberately and cynically misled the GPA?
We obviously welcome the publication of the report, and it's not my role to comment on each individual finding of fact or otherwise that the chairman might have made. The report is very detailed, makes a lot of comments about many different individuals, and my role as chair of the GPA is to focus on the recommendations relevant to police governance and the changes the GPA should consider.
Avoiding conflicts of interest is one of the key recommendations in the report, but as you are a colleague of Mr. Picardo, who's connected to Hassan's, isn't that a conflict of interest itself, and how will you ensure that the lines are clearly drawn?
I think conflicts of interest is a really important issue, and it's vital that we are constantly aware of this issue. Whenever I take any role, whether it's a director of a bank or director of a property company or indeed member of the board of a charity, The issue of conflict always is up in my mind, and that was indeed something that I considered when this role was put to me. People should know, or I remind them, that this was a role suggested to me by the former governor and then repeated by the present governor. I considered whether there was any conflict situation, and I felt that there was not, that I could discharge this function independently and without any difficulty. And clearly the governor thought that himself when he proceeded to make the appointment.
The GPA was heavily criticised in the report for its lack of independence and procedural flaws. Can you tell us what steps are you taking to remedy that? Now,
it is clear from the report that the demands made of the GPA have become so complicated, have become so challenging, especially with modern policing, that there are things we should be doing better. And that doesn't surprise me. When I first came into this role, it was evident immediately that the nature of obligations we have against what resources were available were not matched, and there was a need indeed to consider that aspect. The report in effect confirms that and highlights some of the issues that we should be dealing with. So we haven't yet had at GPA level a full discussion. This report, as you know, was published on the 23rd of December. The GPA consists of 10 members, all of whom have to be brought together. We have a meeting later on this month to discuss the recommendations fully. But in principle, we of course accept the recommendations made and will be addressing them and making sure that they can be implemented as soon as possible.
Well, ensuring the independence of the police is obviously a primary concern for you, and one of the report's findings was that the Chief Minister had attempted to thwart an ongoing police investigation. This is something that he does not agree with, but that is a finding of the report. So will you be discussing how to ensure that the police maintains its independence going forward?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think it's always been clear that the police has operational independence, and neither the government nor the GPA nor any other body has any role in interfering with the operational independence of the RGP. We have constant contact with the RGP and the Commissioner. We are obviously, as GPA, often brought up to speed with matters that are sensitive, often linked to operations, but purely to make sure that we are kept informed within the parameters of what is our job to make sure that the RGP is held accountable. But I think the independence of the RGP operationally is accepted by all. I don't think there's any challenge to that. Whether in any particular facts any lines have been crossed is a different matter. And the report makes its own conclusions, rightly or wrongly. The different parties have their own take on the extent to which the report's findings are properly made out or not. But I think there's no doubt about the fact that the Gibraltar actors within what is law enforcement governance fully respect and understand that operational independence of the RGP is critical in Gibraltar and is critical for any system based on rule of law.
The Chief Minister came up with the strongest criticisms, grossly inappropriate behaviour, etc., etc. I won't repeat all of them. But do you think it's right that the Chief Minister, who was heavily criticised in the report, should be on that steering committee?
But look, the GPA was heavily criticised in the report. There were things said about the interim governor that were also critical of his position. There were comments made about a whole number of different actors in relation to the facts leading to the Mr. McGrail's retirement. The people represented in the steering committee are those people responsible constitutionally for law enforcement and for the undertaking of the security in Gibraltar. So it's appropriate that they should be on this committee. Of course it should be. To what is the alternative proposition? That outsiders completely should look at the question of reformulating governance, police governance in Gibraltar? I think that would be absurd. The people in the committee, Governor, Chief Minister, Chair of the GPA, Minister for Justice, Attorney General, these are people who constitutionally have the responsibility for this area, and it's absolutely right that they should get on with their work, irrespective of what might be the findings of the report and any further outcomes that it might produce.
The chairman also made two findings or recommendations as regards the chair of the GPA. He said the chair must have a sufficiently robust character to maintain the independence of the GPA. So I ask you whether you feel that you have that character. It might seem like a bit of a moot question, but I want to put that to you nevertheless. And the second question is as regards remuneration. He recommends that the position is remunerated to ensure that sufficient space and time is allowed for that person to carry out that role. So, do you have a sufficiently robust character, and will you be remunerated for your position?
Right, with regard to the former, well, I hope that I do. I mean, I've spent many, many years in law and in politics, standing up to people and saying what I believe in and trying to prevail when I thought I was right. So I have no doubts on that front. But it's true to say that you are dealing with very powerful people all around you who know a lot about these areas. So therefore, one has to be very vigilant in, on the one hand, being independent, but on the other hand, being collaborative. Because you can be independent and be confrontational. My style is to be independent, but to be collaborative, because I think there is usually much more that unites us than divides us. But I'm very conscious of the need to remain and be independent, as are the other members of this authority. When they meet as authority members, and the fact that we are independent is a constitutional requirement, and we are very, very much involved with that thinking and engaged in that mindset all the time. The issue of remuneration is very interesting because virtually all of my predecessors in this post have put to me the fact that the amount of engagement and time that they were called upon to give was much more than they had anticipated, and that the issues were much more complicated and demanding than might have seemed the case initially. It's a difficult one because if you remunerate, then the nature of the relationship, I think, the people around the authority changes. But on the other hand, this job cannot be done just with quarterly meetings or ad hoc involvement. This job and what the GPA undertakes and its responsibilities requires a degree of engagement which is, if not full-time, virtually full-time. I think my previous chair said, and I think in the hearing, that it was effectively full-time, and I think Mr. Gonsalves, another chairman, said it was 40 hours a week. Right? It certainly is a 24/7 concern. I have no deputy. I regard myself as permanently on duty. I mean, there is no time when I don't think it is appropriate for the Commissioner of Police or the Governor, the Chief Minister, to give me a call on GPA matters, because I feel very seized with that responsibility, as are the other members. So it is an onerous and difficult position. It's a privilege to undertake it, but whether remuneration is the right answer or not is something we'll have to consider. Linked to the issue of remuneration, the report also talks about resources more broadly, and indeed whether there should be some form of chief executive or other executive capacity within the authority. And that's another possibility. We are very scantily resourced at present. There is nobody that has the responsibility to take, as I say, executive matters. I, as chair, have no executive capacity separate to any other member beyond having an extra casting vote. If we vote something on the authority and there is an equality of votes, I have a second casting vote. But beyond that, there's no formal power I have as chair. As chair, of course, I assume, and rightly, I think, are expected to show some leadership and to therefore, in a sense, direct the authority, but there's no formal executive power. So I think this is one of the big issues arising from the report. If we are to retain the police authority as the model for Gibraltar, I have noted before that in other overseas territories they still have responsibility to the governor. We're moving on constitutionally. If we're going to retain the GPA as the model, we've got to make sure it works more efficiently. And how we do that is one of the critical things we're engaged in discussing.
And that was Peter Montegriffo speaking to me earlier today. I am very conscious of the fact that we did have the leader of the opposition speaking earlier on, but Nick Cruz had come in, so I didn't really offer you an opportunity to comment on that interview. So if there's anything in the remaining minutes of the programme that you'd like to comment on either Mr. Azopardi's interview or Mr. Montegrifo's, please do so now.
Well, I mean, what jumped out to me from Keith Azopardi's interview, and he basically said stuff that he's said before, the resignation, highlighting the grossly improper attempts at interference and so on, as laid out in the report. But he kind of doubled down, I thought, a little bit on the issue of the ministers, no? And that he hopes to carry that motion of no confidence. I thought that was quite interesting. And I'm not sure that I agree with him when he said that the treaty is done and dusted. I think he said that, or did I mishear that? I think he meant that the treaty text is done and dusted, but it's not really, is it?
It can't be used as an excuse anymore. So I think what
but I'm not sure if I agree with that. I've got to be honest with you, because we are in a very difficult place with. I mean, it's undergoing a legal review, but that's where the more issues are going to arise. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know. You probably have a better idea of this than I do. And then it does have to go through the whole ratification process in the EU Parliament. It has to go through the CRAG procedure for ratification in the UK Parliament. The UK side of it first has to start in the Gibraltar Parliament. So I can understand why the Chief Minister would say, "Let me finish it." You know, that's my key. That's my key place. One can disagree, or one can agree.
Okay. Do either of you want to comment on those interviews?
Sorry, I just think it's interesting what Brian said about carrying the motion. So I would imagine waiting for somebody to cross the floor.
I mean, he just needs one, no?
He just needs one. And he specifically said the leadership contenders, because, of course, Nigel Feetham and Gemma Arias Vasquez are the two people that we see as leadership contenders. And, of course, they are both partners with the Chief Minister at her sands as well. So I think that the leader of the opposition wanted to really put that point across, and hoping that somebody does sort of say, well, I'm not going to support the Chief Minister, and crosses the floor.
OK, and Dominic Searle?
One thing is we all smiled when Nick said not necessarily about standing in politics. But I think an important thing, because there's the constant theme about the resignation, is that when we talk about, and everybody says in UK this and in UK that, we've had series of resignations of Prime Ministers in the UK. And there's always queues of people ready to continue in the government, and in fact, probably trying to push the Chief Minister out in the first place. So the consequences of what Keith is calling for and others are calling for, if you did it immediately, would, in my view, actually make the treaty quite impossible, because we already stopped the treaty a number of times because of elections and different things. That's not to say that, that's a good reason. I mean, people can feel strongly or not about the findings of the McGrail Inquiry, but you have to look at this in the full consequence of what you're talking about and where it fits in a hierarchy.
And there's a very important issue with the treaty that they've all throughout the process they've always avoided deadlines, but there is a deadline of sorts, because come April the 1st, the EES, which is the automated entry-exit
which
system,
is causing havoc everywhere.
But if this treaty is not ratified and in place by then that is going to happen at the border.
I'm going to...
The situation is. So they need to get this done, basically.
Sorry, I'm going to read out 3 emails that we've had. It's not been an influx tonight. I think, as we found with the Vox Pop, some people are reluctant to really get involved. Kaylin Lucas has sent us an email. I think he's confused me for you, because he says...
Not again.
I think so. He says, during the course of the programme, we have heard Mrs Vasquez selectively quote various aspects of the report. However, while she continues to insist that the Chief Minister influenced the Governor's decision, she has notably failed to refer to paragraph 0.132 of the report, which directly addresses and rejects that assertion. I think I'm the one that said that the Chief Minister influenced the Governor, but I said so in the context that was the trigger. It was when the Chief Minister went to speak to him. That was the trigger for Mr McGrail's eventual retirement. However, I will read some of the paragraph.
I don't think I've said that. So,
I will read some of the paragraph that Kaylin said, and it says, I reject, this is Sir Peter Openshaw, I reject the suggestion that Mr Pyle was manipulated by Mr Picardo during the exchanges. Mr Pyle had legitimate and serious complaints that on the 8th and 9th of March, Mr McGrail did not provide the best available information, and just to paraphrase also the bad HMIC report. So I think I'm the one that said influence, and I did so in the context that was the trigger. There are a couple of other emails. Carl says the people of Gibraltar should walk out. It's clear that the auditor report and the McGrail inquiry shows abuse of power has happened. Let's not forget how the Chief Minister changed laws on the Marachi case. Many people of Gibraltar are suffering of this abuse, he says. And Joseph says, he poses a question: should the Chief Minister resign if he has breached the code of conduct for members of the Gibraltar Parliament? So that's a question he's posed.
If I can just add something on the Keith Azopardi, the leader of the opposition, the calls for the resignation, and that's something that's just triggered my memory. I mean, it's no surprise that the leader of the opposition was going to call. I don't think it's shocked anyone. It certainly hasn't shocked the Chief Minister, who would have known that this was coming, because if the leader of the opposition doesn't try to make political capital, who will?
Yeah.
I mean, that's fair play.
We are
in fairness to Keith, he was saying that it's about more than making political capital. It's just the nature of the findings.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not surprising. Nobody's going to get shocked at resignation calls.
I'd like to thank you all very much for coming in and talking about this. As you said, it's the debate is going to continue for quite a while. It's going to go to Parliament. It remains to be seen whether there are any legal challenges. But for now, thank you very much, Dominic, Christine and Brian, for coming in and offering your analysis and your experience. And thank you very much for watching as well. Viewpoint returns next week at the same time. Good night.